So good evening, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Glad you are tuned in. Sorry that I missed you last week. Just wasn't feeling well. Sorry about that. Also, just quickly before we get started, I want to say, hey, if you're a member of Clarksville Highway, and even if you aren't, I just want you to know we have a great church family. I sent out a request for help not very long ago, and man, our church family responded. Just quickly. It was like they came in by text instead of phone calls, but it was like boom, 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 and what we needed was taken care of. So if you volunteered for that, thank you. If you were going to volunteer but you haven't yet, it's already taken care of. But thank you. And hey, it's just kind of a shout out to our church family. You were it was great the way you responded to that. So thank you very very much for what you did with that. And man, I just want to say thank you. So I had a plan tonight of something that I wanted to cover, and I was going to talk about these paradoxical statements of Jesus, and I'm really excited about that class. We're going to do that because I was going to teach about parables, but we have some new stuff, some new kind of new idea that's coming out the second week of June. And we're using parables for that. So I didn't want to teach parables and then you learn parables again. So I switched what I was going to do to these teachings about Jesus that I wanted to talk about. So two things about that. Number one is be watching for some information for the classes that are coming out in June. You should probably see a trailer on the next couple of Sunday mornings. Really excited about that. It's really, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think you're really going to enjoy what we're putting together. And the second part of that is, as I was kind of preparing for all of that this week, I just started thinking about tonight and what today is. Let me do a quick do a quick switch on something if I can. All right, I don't get down in the side of the screen instead of right in the middle. I just started thinking about tonight and what tonight is. So tonight is the first night of the Passover festival. So it's actually Passover, which depending on the calendar that you would be keeping, either started at sundown tonight, so you're just right at the beginning of Passover on the Jewish calendar. So when I'm talking about on the screen right here, it says like on this night, I don't mean Wednesday night. I mean Nisan the 14th, which is the date that it is on the Jewish calendar. I think during Jesus' lifetime, although there's some debate about this. Now, I realize there's some debate about this, and I don't want to go into that debate. So I'm just telling you that I think Jesus shared Passover with the disciples on Thursday night. And I know this is Wednesday night, but it's kind of like if you think about holidays. So in America, where I am, Thanksgiving is always the fourth Thursday of November. It's been that way since 1941. So Thanksgiving never changes. Thanksgiving is always on a Thursday. But if you think about Christmas, Christmas changes days of the week because Christmas is a particular day on the calendar, which is December the 25th. Like in 2022, that was a Sunday. This year, 2023, it's going to be a Monday. And 2024, the next year you would think it would be a Tuesday, but it's actually going to be a Wednesday because that's a leap year. Okay, so when we're thinking about Passover, Passover is a particular day of the month, so the day of the week switches around. So tonight is Passover, but in Jesus' day, Nisan the 14th would have been a Thursday. But I'm just concerned about the day on the calendar, Nisan the 14th, which this year is a Wednesday. So I was just thinking about what happened on that night. And it's I just want to kind of go through it. I just want you to think about it. I just want you to think about the significance of what happened on this night. You know, the first thing that happened. Oh, hang on a second. Kind of messed up so I can see what I need to go on my screen here. I can't switch my slide without fixing this first. Sorry about that. Didn't realize it was messed up. There we go. So the first thing I wanted to say is it was on this night that God delivered the Israelites. I mean, if you go back to Exodus, we talked about this on Sunday morning. So if you want to get a little deeper on this, just go to the Sunday morning sermon, go to the YouTube channel, and it will be on there. But if you go to the text, you know, you're in Exodus chapter 11. Exodus chapter 11 is a plague on the firstborn. And Exodus chapter 12 is the instructions for the Passover. And then Exodus chapter, at the end part of chapter 12, it's actually the Exodus. So what happened on this night is during the night, let me make this a little bigger so you can see it. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites, and go worship the Lord as you requested. And take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go and also bless me," which is very interesting, but that's a different Bible class, okay? And the Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, "We will all die." So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. And the Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people and gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. So on this night, Nisan, the 14th, is the night that God would have sent the plague on the firstborn, that Pharaoh would have called to Moses in the middle of the night, and they would have left Egypt in a hurry with their bread on their shoulders. I mean, it's just a really exciting thing that would have happened on this night. We mentioned Sunday morning, there are 143 verses where God referenced that he delivered Israel out of Egypt. And so on this night is when he said that he came on judgment on all the gods of Israel, and the Israelites left their Egyptian bondage, and they marched out on this night. And I think it's just pretty incredible when you think about the things that happen on this particular day in history. Again, not a Wednesday, just Nisan the 14th. I don't know how long they had been in slavery in Egypt. The text tells us in Exodus there arose a king who did not know Joseph. Well, Joseph would have lived 71 years after the Israelites got to Egypt before his death. So he would have lived after his father came to Egypt. Joseph would have lived 71 years. And then Moses would have been born 350 years, I think, into captivity. It would been 279 years after Joseph's death that Moses comes along. So somewhere between 71 and 270, I don't know where in there they became slaves, but they did. And this is the night that God, hearing the cries of his people, delivered them out of Egypt. And I think that's also so incredibly important when we think about that, and we think about what God has delivered us from. So tonight we just don't remember like the Passover, and the way Passover got its name is that God passed over their houses because of the blood that was on the doorpost and the lintel. So it's not that, it's just a day of deliverance. And I just want you to remember that, just that it is a day of God's deliverance. And there are really other incredible things that happen on Passover. So tonight would have been the night that Jesus shared Passover with his disciples. So when you read about the supper in the upper room, that would have been on, I think that was on Nisan the 14th. I think it would have been on tonight. Again, not Wednesday night, but the day of the year, Nisan the 14th. I think in Jesus' time, it was on Thursday night. Now, again, I understand there's some debate around that. I don't want to get into all of the debate. I'll get into just a little bit of it, but I don't want to get into all of that debate. But I think Jesus shared the Passover with the disciples on Thursday, was crucified on Friday, was resurrected on Sunday. And again, I know there are people who have a little bit different opinion about that. I don't really think it's a matter of salvation. I'm just telling you what I think. The reason that comes up is, let me just show you a couple of verses really quickly. And I'm not going to give a great explanation of this, just a little bit of a teaser explanation of where I am when I think about this. When it comes time for the Last Supper, the text says, "Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed." And so when you think about that, you think, okay, that was the day of Passover, the 14th. They sacrificed the lambs. They celebrate Passover that evening. So that's what Jesus would have done. And I think that's very correct. But when you go over to John's gospel, John says something that's a little bit different. And it said in verse 14 of chapter 19, said, "It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour." So was it the day of preparation, or was it the day of Passover? This is when Jesus is on trial and crucified, okay, not. And so later, at the death of Jesus, John writes, "Now it was the day of preparation," in verse 31, "and the next day was to be a special Sabbath, and because the Jews did not want the body on the crosses." So, you kind of combine those, and you look at that and you think, okay, then what day is John referring to? Because the Sadducees would not even go into Pilate's temple, because it says they didn't want to be defiled because they couldn't share the Passover, so they couldn't participate in that. Well, there's a couple of things that happen. All right. And number one, the Passover can mean one of two things. And John seems to use it the second way more often. Passover can mean the very night of Passover, or right after Passover, you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which lasts for 7 days. So you have an 8-day festival. Well, through the years, the 8-day festival, Passover, and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, because they left Egypt without leaven in their bread. Remember, we just read that. That all became known as Passover. So if it says they didn't want to defile themselves so they couldn't share the Passover, it might have not have been the Passover meal as much, or just the whole Passover event, the entire week. Now, the question is, well, how about this day of preparation? And I know you got to be careful how you compare languages and how it works now as opposed to how it works somewhere else. But I think this is really interesting. I want to go to a different kind of translation. So it was the day of preparation. And if you look at this word, this is a Greek word, paraskivi. And so that's the word that means the day of preparation of the Sabbath, the day of preparation. I think this is really interesting. If you go and you look at, I just pulled up Google Translate, okay? And so if I put in English language Friday, what is the word for Friday in modern Greek? It is paraskouvi, which is the same word that we just looked at, because it was the paraskouvi. I think he's saying it was the Friday before the Saturday, because that's what Friday was called. It's called preparation because the next day is the Sabbath. So even in the Greek language, it kind of took on that meaning. So I think all John is referring to here is the Sabbath. Well, how about this thing about Passover and lambs? There's pretty good evidence, and we'll do a deeper class on this sometime. I'm just kind of giving you the highlights. Okay, there's pretty good evidence from one of the Dead Sea Scrolls actually refers to it at one place, that there was this point of contention that was going on between the Galilean Jews and the Pharisees, and the Judean Jews and the Sadducees, and how that you count time. So we count time. I mean, when you look at, usually the way that we look at Bible time, we say, well, they counted time from evening to evening, because there was evening and morning, because there was evening and morning the first day. So they counted from sundown to sundown. Well, that's how the Galilean Jews and the Pharisees would count it. There's a little bit of evidence that there's this debate going on, even at Jesus' time, that the Sadducees and the Judean Jews have started using kind of a Roman way of looking at that, and they're counting sunrise to sunrise. So if that were the case, the Galilean Jews would have been sacrificing their animals on one day, and the Sadducees and the Judean Jews would have been sacrificing theirs on the next day, and very much that could have been going on here in this case. I don't want to get into a lot of detail about that. I think the 14th, since Jesus was Galilean, since I think he counted time, one of the reasons that John would have looked at time from the aspect of the Sadducees is because he's really in that whole section of the gospel highlighting Jesus' opponents and what they were thinking and what they were doing, and they were Sadducees, so he would have used their type of time frame, I think. But anyway, we get into that some other time really deep at some point, not tonight. I think Jesus shared the Passover with his disciples on the 14th, which was the night that we would traditionally think of as Passover. So this is the night that Jesus would have sat with his disciples. And, and if you go back to the text and you look at what is happening in that, after taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you, for I tell you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took the bread and he gave thanks and he broke it and he gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. For the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table, and the Son of Man will go as it had been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him." So when you look at all of those things, I just think it's really interesting. So at the night that they would have been delivered from Egypt, that is the same night, time-wise, date-wise, day of the year that Jesus would have sat down with his disciples and said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a new type of celebration of who I am." And just on this night, it's just incredible that to me that would have happened. So communion, which becomes a place for us, which is, in some ways remorse, because we realize it is our sin that led Jesus to the cross. So it brings an aspect of repentance, celebration, because he decided to go to the cross, that Jesus decided to give his life for us, which is a moment that is, it does bring a sense of remorse, but at the same time, it's captured with this idea of celebration because what God has done for us. It's a time of reflection. How are we living? Are we living in a way that's worthy of Jesus' sacrifice? It's a time of dedication. It's a new festival that God has given us, not a yearly festival, a weekly festival, that every time we come together as a church body, it might be a bi-weekly festival if you wanted to, but every time you come together as a church body thinking about the death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus and what Jesus has done for us. I mean, in our fellowship, we typically celebrate that every Sunday morning. And so this would have been the night that Jesus shared that Passover. So what else would have happened on this night? So this would have been the night where, in the way of that slide, that Judas betrayed Jesus. He had gone to them and he had arranged the price, the 30 pieces of silver, and you find in the book of Exodus that there is this that if a bull gores a male or a female slave, the owner pays 30 shekels of silver, which is the price that Judas was given. So typically, sometimes we say that was the price of a slave. But you think about, so this is the night that Jesus would have said to Judas, what you have to do it quickly. Or when Jesus was eating with the disciples and he says, the one who puts his hand in the bowl with mine is the one who will betray me. Or when the disciples look around the room and Jesus says that, and they say, is it me? I mean, is it me that's going to do that? And Judas goes out, and later that night, Judas is going to be the one who leads the soldiers to the garden and points Jesus out and kisses him. I mean, just think about what happens on this night. And it just makes me think and reflect. And is there an amount that for which you would betray Jesus? And maybe for you it's a money amount. Maybe it's not an amount of money. Maybe it's a thing or a situation or a circumstance or a person. Maybe it's yourself, right? But you think, okay, what would cause me to betray Jesus for what looks like such an incredibly small price? Things that would have happened on this night. So on this night, Jesus would have gone to the garden to pray. When they leave the Last Supper, they sing a hymn. They go to the Mount of Olives. He takes Peter, James, and John just a little bit further than the rest of the disciples. He tells them to sit and to pray with him. And if you remember this from the text, and I know you remember, they fall asleep. And you think, man, how can you fall asleep? They fall asleep, but 3 times he prays to God with great anguish. Father, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but your will be done. And you think about that, and you think, wow, what an incredible prayer. I mean, that's, if you want to pray a true prayer, I've always kind of tongue-in-cheek said, if you want to pray a prayer which always is answered yes by God, the prayer that you pray is, God, let your will be done. Let your will be done. And you think about Jesus and his anguish and his struggle. He experienced agony at that moment, like the rest of men. The drops that fell, they were, kind of like blood. But he knew his purpose. He knew the hour that he had come into the world. He knew what he came into the world for. He knew God's plan for his life. But the anguish of in his life at that moment, allowing God's will to be done. I mean, that was a real anguish. I mean, that was just some kind of show. I mean, he was experiencing the anguish of, we know Jesus always did the will of the Father, right? But he's it's such an incredible moment. But I point that out because I think what needs to happen there is the heart of Jesus in that prayer should be the heart of every disciple, that we pray that God's will be done. Things that happen on this night, Nisan the 14th. Man, I think about Peter. I mean, Peter is, let me do something really quick. I think I can do this. Well, that didn't work so well. I was going to move to the other side of the screen. But I kind of messed that up, didn't I? So hang on just a second. No, I think I can fix that. So on this night, Peter is on such an incredible range of emotion. I mean, you think he's at the Last Supper with Jesus. He says, I will never deny you. I won't turn away. I'll follow you to the death. And Peter means that. I mean, Peter's not just saying words when he says that. Peter means that he will follow Jesus to the death. So Peter goes from proclaiming his allegiance to Jesus, They go into the garden. They come to arrest Jesus. I don't know if you remember this from the text. Peter takes out his sword and cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest Malchus. Remember, Jesus says, hey, Peter, put your sword up. I mean, if you're Peter and you just said, I'll follow you to death. And Jesus says, Peter, you don't realize you're going to deny me before the night's over. And so then the soldiers show up. Peter, I think in all of his fervor, pulls out his sword. I will not deny you. I will fight to the death. He cuts off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. Jesus says, Peter, put your sword up. They lead Jesus off. Peter follows at a distance with another disciple. He gets into the courtyard, and we know what happens, right? 3 times he denies Jesus before the rooster crows. So this night, Peter would have denied Jesus. And that, you think about the heart of Peter, that had to be such a roller coaster night. From sharing a meal, proclaiming your allegiance, trying to defend Jesus, going to the courtyard, and then denying, and then the rooster crowing, and Jesus looking right at you. And just the sorrow and the anguish and the shame that Peter would have felt. But on this night, that would have happened. And not just to place everything on Peter, the disciples deserted. I mean, this is the night that Jesus said, you'll all desert me, and they all deserted him. We know Peter in greater detail because he was in the courtyard, and we have his denial recorded in Scripture. But, I mean, Judas had already betrayed Jesus. That leaves 10. The other 10 deserted, just like Judas betrayed and Peter denied. And you think about that band of who had of close disciples. I mean, Jesus, and large crowds followed him, but there was something special about these 12. And these 12 on this moment in the garden after his arrest, they deserted. And you I mean, we might stop and look at that and think, man, that was just utter failure. Well, in a way it was, but do you 11 of those, Judas hung himself, but 11 of those became incredible disciples, apostles for God's kingdom. They did not allow a moment of failure to define who they were. And that's kind of what, when I think about this night, I think, and when I kind of get a lesson to you, don't allow one moment of failure, whatever that moment is. I mean, I can't think of anything much worse than denying Jesus the way Peter did, but don't let that one moment define who you are. They deserted, but then they returned to Jesus and became great apostles for him. Maybe John, I've wondered if John, if he was the one who Jesus loved and he was at the foot of the cross, which I think he was. Maybe John recognized his failure first. Maybe he was one of the first ones to return. I don't know, because I think he was at the foot of the cross at a moment there when Jesus looked at him. But they deserted Jesus, but then they came back. They didn't allow that moment to define who they were. Things that happen on this night, as I just think about what that means. And then, Jewish leaders rejected. I mean, this was the ultimate rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. I mean, they tried him illegally. They had opposed him. They had tried to get rid of him. They had tried to destroy him. They had questioned his teaching. They had tried to trick him. They had done everything in their power to discredit Jesus and his ministry. And now at this moment, with his arrest and his trial and then his crucifixion, this is the ultimate rejection. Their ultimate rejection. The thing that amazes me about that is even in their ultimate rejection, God's will is accomplished. because Jesus came into this world for one purpose, and that was to give his life on the cross for the sins of the people, for the sins of many. So even in their rejection, they accomplish God's purpose. So on this night, just on this night, Nisan the 14th, the night of Passover, all of the different things that happened on this night. You know, so maybe you stop and you reflect on that. You know, maybe you reflect on different aspects. Maybe, you know, maybe you reflect on all of them. I don't know. I kind of am, but you know, I can. The excitement of the Israelites as they are finally released from slavery, and they march out of Egypt like they are victorious in God, which they were. To know that on this night God delivered the Israelites, to know that this is the night that Jesus sat down and shared that Passover meal with the disciples, where he instituted that, a sacred moment of grace, of communion, of remembering when we come together his death, his burial, his resurrection, and what he has done for us, the body and the blood that he shed. To think about Judas, to know this is the night. He arranged the deal before, but this was the night that he went out and he met the Sadducees, and he took them to arrest Jesus. That Peter went through his huge range of emotion, from declaring his allegiance to Jesus, to trying to protect Jesus, to denying Jesus, and then Jesus looking straight at him. To know this was the night that Jesus prayed that incredible prayer in the garden, which I think, I know that you got the Lord's Prayer as a model prayer, and the high priestly prayer in John is an incredible prayer of Jesus, you know, worthy of a study all on its own. But this prayer in the garden, to me, is so significant, because you see Jesus saying, God, let your will be done, knowing that it was for this hour that he came into the world, knowing that he came for this moment, and even knowing it was God's will, the anguish. And I think sometimes, you know, us even knowing that something is the will of God, there can be an anguish in accomplishing that thing, just because we get this, I think, misconception that if it's God's will, everything just goes really well, and it's all just kind of lined up for us, and every circumstance works out great. But you know what? Maybe this lesson from Jesus in the garden is maybe not. We know God's hand in the plan was perfect, right? But Jesus' part in that plan, this prayer in the garden, where he prays, an incredible moment in Jesus' ministry. To think that the disciples deserted, but they didn't let that moment define who they were. They became great disciples, and to see that there are those who are just going to reject Jesus no matter what he does or who he is or what he says. There are some who are always going to reject the purpose of God, and the Jewish leaders, the Sadducees, doing that on this night. So I just want you to take some time and just think on this night the things that happen. Hey, looking forward Sunday morning to sharing Easter Sunday with you. Please, if you don't have a church home, you're close to Clarksville Highway, we'd love to have you be with us on Sunday morning. We have Bible class at 9 o'clock, worship at 10, and would love to have you present this Sunday morning. Any Sunday morning that you would like to attend, we'd love to have you. So we'll live stream Sunday morning starting at 9 for Bible class, 10 for worship, and then back here next week at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night, talking about some of the paradoxes in Jesus' teaching. Really looking forward to that, and getting ready to launch this new study in June, which I'm really excited about. So I hope you have a great evening. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and hopefully you'll be watching one of these live streams again very soon. Thank you.